I'm Dr. S. Ratnam, Assistant Professor retired. I've been teaching English language and English literature for the benefit of the students who are appearing for competitive examinations and for those who want to learn English language sitting at home. These classes may be useful to the students and the teachers and others who want to learn and enjoy English language and literature. If you like these classes, you can share it to others and subscribe for your continuous programming. In my earlier class, I taught on metaphysical movement in literature. There are certain movements in different ages. One is called metaphysical movement that reigned for a century. And later, classical movement came into literature. This reigned for nearly 2 centuries, so that means 200 years. Classical movement and classical writings. And classical writers were highly venerated. And later, romantic movement, romantic revival came, and that lasted nearly for 2 centuries or 200 years. So these are all the movements and the periods in which they strove, and people wanted to shoot to their feelings, intellect, and satisfaction. So, metaphysical poets and metaphysical writings, they became waned, and people were no longer subscribing for the metaphysical writings. People were no longer showing interest in that style of writing. People's minds slowly changed from that trend of writing to metaphysical trend of writing to classical trend of writing. So that is called classical age, classical writing, or classical period, classical movement. These are all the words that apply to it. The period in which this movement flourished is known as, at least by 3 titles, the classical age, with reference to the standards it provided, the Augustan age, and the age of reason. These are the 3 titles used for this classical age. One is classical age, second is Augustan age, and the third is age of reason. Classical age or classical writings, that word applied means a great shift occurred in the writing pattern. The very word shows us classical means a kind of class that is not for all, it is for a class. That class is the highest class, highest reading class. to satisfy them, writers preferred their writings. So, Dr. Johnson also said that Dryden did for English letters what Augustus did for the city of Rome. So the King Augustus, he built the magnificent city of Rome. He put all his efforts, he put all his mind and nerve to bring that greatness to that city, Rome. So Dryden also, what Augustus did for the Rome, Dryden did for literature, that means. So that is a remark made by Dr. Johnson. Factors responsible for the changed outlook. Certain factors were there, factors responsible for the change of outlook. About the middle of the 17th century, a change came over the English poetic temperament. The metaphysical wave had exhausted itself and had left literary standards and values confused. When a metaphysical wave was in wane, so there was a confusion of literary values, what to do, and with what kind of writings are to be taken up. That was a kind of confusion. But Ben Jonson with prophetic vision had seen this danger and also shown a way out, while the older Elizabethans were deriving their inspiration from the matter of the Greek and Latin classics available. So a certain kind of writers, they took interest in matter of the Greek and Latin writers. But the classical writers, there was a change, a shift to not to the matter, to the form. They gave much importance to the form. The style of the language, the artful style, artistic manner, the highly artistic. And it is not to the reach of the common man's language. It is the language of the bards, it is the language of the royal monarchs, it is the language of the high strata of society. So the writers searched for that kind of language. Writers searched for the words that suit to the high class society of people. Some writers, they have taken spirit from the matter of the Greek and Latin writers. But Ben Jonson tried a new model. That new model is new turn. It showed a new turn to the writings that culminate form and the matter as well, both. So both were combined together. the example was ignored by a time, but it was effective later when the metaphysical method in its decay began to produce more weeds than flowers. The return to a greater restraint and more rapid framework was accelerated by the powerful influence of the French literary tastes, themselves derived from classical literature on the English court as a result of Charles II's long stay in France after the execution of his father. Very soon the new, or rather new spirit proved itself in all branches of literary activities. Seneca provided the model for tragedy. Senecan tragedy, we call it. Seneca provided for tragedy. Even today, the tragedy, Seneca is remembered. Senecan model of tragedy. So that means a tragedy takes place even in its own structure. Along with the growth of a person, he may be a monarch or he may be an ordinary person, along with the growth of that person, the tragic occurrence also grows. That is the Senecan model. The tragical mode also grows along with him. So, for the tragedy of a person, he is responsible. So no one is responsible for the tragedy of that person because tragedy grows along with him. So that is Senecan philosophy. Seneca provided the model for tragedy. Plato for comedy. Plato gave the structure for comedy. What structure leads to the comedy? Comedy means it is not simply rousing some kind of laughter. No, it is wrong. Comedy means through the turmoil of life, at the end, a divided couple, their life leads to be united. So that is the meaning of comedy. And so Plato gave a platform for the comedy, Seneca for tragedy, Virgil for epic. So for all epics, Virgil found a way by using the language, the theme, the sublimity of the theme, and all principles of epic. That is Virgil. Juvenal for satire. Juvenal, he was another writer. He founded a way for satire. So these are all the forms of writing influenced by classical thoughts and classical atmosphere. And Horatio is another writer. He produced a kind of criticism, literary criticism. So literary criticism founded on certain rules. A literary piece must be accepted only basing on certain rules. And if that piece of art is not met by rules prescribed for the classical age, so that is rooted out, blotted out. That was not accepted. Even Shakespeare was condemned. Shakespeare's writings were condemned on the lines of rules, prescribed rules. But Ben Jonson condemned the rules, and he supported Shakespeare and the matter, what is important to the people. It's not the rules, it is the matter that is very important. So this way, classical age ruled in all areas of literature, that is drama, poetry, and all these things. The change involved the substitution of training. For instance, of conscious craftsmanship for erratic self-expression. So it is consciously gave way for craftsmanship. So craftsmanship is a kind of trained art in writing. So writers became trained artists in this classical period. Edmund Waller and Sir John Derham were the pioneers of the new movement. They led the reaction against the metaphysical excesses by writing charming verse on the classical model. Sir John Derham and Edmund Waller. These were the two pioneers in this classical writing. And later, these two were followed by Dryden and Pope. Dryden and Pope strengthened the classical writing. Established by Edmund Waller and Sir John Derham. Dryden and Pope, who both drew inspiration from these lesser poets among the comparatively small company of writers and readers in those days. A new fashion spread quickly, and a classical soon became the accepted mode. Its reign was long and remarkable. Its reign, R-E-I-G-N. So, classical age continued for a long time. Its impact was very strong on the minds of the readers. Readers preferred classical mode of writing because of the standards that the writers followed, the high standards. And slowly standards began, in later times, standards began to relegate or go down. And a new era comes into operation. And that new era let us discuss in later class. Characteristics of the new school. There are some characteristics for the new school and why this school sustained and why this school was developed and protected by the people means there were certain characteristics. So that is respect for rules. Rules were respected. Rule is very important. Meter is very important. Matter comes next. Only the rule for respect for the rule. So that was a kind of a society which wanted those days. Intellectual quality is another important thing in this classical movement. Intellectual quality. So there must be intellectuality. Intellectuality means the high standards of language, high standards of life. And everything is high standard. There are certain people who loved this kind of standard life. But later time slowly these standards eroded. Why standards eroded means there is a law of change. Every age has its own factors, and according to that factor, change may take place, either progressively or digressively. There must be a change. Intellectuality and intellectual appeal. The classical mindset does not attract the modern reader. Today, the modern reader may not attract to the classical writing or the classical theme. But there is a standard in it. And what keeps the works of these writers alive is the quality in which they themselves delighted. Why these writings were, classical writings were still in vogue, still getting respect, means the values and the standards in which they were written. And that is the only reason that even today the classical writings were read and respected. May not all the people, but at least a section of people even today enjoy the classical writings. Set poetic rule. Insistence on a set poetic rule, that's all. Poetry means this. Poetry must be written in this framework of structure only, and outside this framework is not at all poetry. However great it may be, however it may produce strong feelings to the readers, it is dismissed on the basis of set rules. I told you already, the greatest writer all over the world, even today respected, Shakespeare, was condemned because of set rules, because of lack of set rules. But he was saved by certain critics like Ben Jonson, Dr. Johnson, sorry. And like these writers, great critics, protected him. Insistence on a set poetic rule. And the next one is emergence of the Homeric heroic couplet. Heroic couplet was the mode of writing during the classical writing. Heroic couplet. In drama, in poetry, in satire, in all these things, heroic poetry, that is heroic couplet was followed in those writings. Then the treatment of town life. All these writers almost came to the city of London. They flourished in London. They wrote about the city life. Their epicenter of life was coffee houses in those days. Coffee houses where people used to gather and discuss the political, religious and contemporary thoughts. And these coffee houses provided a platform for the set rules and the writings and the place for the meeting of great people. Even it provided context between poets and writers and people. Not only writers and people, sometimes even writers and writers. At a time of these classical writings, no wonder there were almost 3,000 coffee houses existed in London city. 3,000 coffee houses. So that means how popular these coffee houses we can understand it. Even Dryden and Pope were met at one coffee house. So the coffee houses in London provided a platform for their writings, and the moods of the people also were studied by the writers, the people who gathered around these coffee houses. And so classical literature and classical movement continued for a long time, and its impact was very strong, and even it was thought necessary. So this was the classical movement. And later, let us go to another movement of writing. Every age has its own qualities, and according to those qualities, people's tastes also change. And with this classical movement, it comes to an end. If you like this video, you can share it and subscribe it for your enjoyment. Well.